I've been playing a ton of the Lies of P DLC, I am currently going through it the second time and having a blast doing so. All of the weapons that they have added to the game are pretty fantastic, and the only downside of this DLC that I can find is that I wish they added more weapons to the game, as the amount of special weapons that we have really isn't that much. So in today's video I'm going to be ranking all of those special weapons, talking about how you should be playing with them and building for them so you can get the most out of them, and placing them on the tier list, ranking how good they actually are. There will be a different ranking video for all of the weapons that you can assemble, but those are a little bit more difficult to rank because they can be split into blade and handle, whereas these ones come into one complete package. So with that being said, my name is Dark Hero, thank you all so much for being here, and let's get started. Starting with the Death Talons, which are these new claw weapon types that are technically considered a sword and are mostly focused on technique, having a D scaling in motivity and A in technique. These claws are a very fast and agile weapon that allow you to get in a lot of hits very quickly. As you can see, whenever you spam the R1 button, you don't really spend a lot of stamina to perform these attacks. They are definitely some of the most efficient weapons in the game, and these claws have the added benefit of having a 40% crit chance, which, in case you aren't aware, there's a few weapons in Lies of P that actually have a crit rate. That with this weapon gives you a 40% chance to deal additional damage, which is when you see that big red flashing light whenever you attack an enemy. Now, despite this weapon having a couple of drawbacks, I do believe that it is actually very powerful, and it is a very fun weapon to play around with. Now, despite not having a lot of reach, you do kind of slightly lunge a little bit when you perform your R1 button, so your basic combo still has a decent amount of reach, and because the weapon is able to hit so many times very quickly, you're able to punish every single opening that the boss gives you very easily, always getting 2 or 3 hits in between parries, and that is very efficient. Another great thing about the Death Talons is both of the dodge attacks, the light and the heavy dodge attacks, as well as the dashing attacks, especially running into the R2, which is definitely one of the best sprinting R2s in the entire game, as it has plenty of range and is pretty safe for the most part and hits 4 different times. Now, when it comes to the actual charged heavy, your charged R2, I believe that the Death Talons have one of the worst ones in the entire game, which is one of the biggest drawbacks to the weapon, because whenever you perform it, your character essentially lunges forward before he does the attack, which a lot of times means you're going to be getting hit on the way to performing the charged R2. Now, when it comes to the Fable Arts, Rampage is a temporary buff that you can activate at the cost of 2 bars from your Fable gauge, where all of your attacks will become enhanced. You'll be able to attack much quicker, do more damage, therefore making the weapons much more powerful. It's a very cheap buff for how powerful it is, and it really makes a huge difference in the performance of the weapon. Now, the other Fable art, Link Slash, is pretty much a combo art that has 3 different attacks, and you spend 1 bar each time you do one of these, and it's going to deal a lot of damage and can also cover a lot of distance with the first hit. So if you see a big opening and you want to go in and stagger the enemy, you can get in with this Fable art and deal a lot of damage along that way. And because of how fast you're able to hit the enemies and how little stamina you spend with this weapon, you're going to be able to play much more aggressively, and you can slap on a talisman like the Arm of God talisman that will increase your damage by doing multiple attacks. And the Death Talons also have a lot of synergy with the new Legion Arm Icarus, so you can maintain a very good uptime on that amulet. Now, the biggest downside of the Death Talons, which is one that isn't a big downside for most other weapons in the game, and why I'm not going to be ranking this weapon as high as some others, is the weapon's durability. It has a base durability of 91, which by itself isn't that big of a deal, but given how many times you hit each time you attack, you're going to be burning through that durability very quickly, to the point where in some boss fights you're going to eventually need to grind your weapon once or even twice, and that can of course lead to you getting hit in the process, the boss fight taking longer, and it's something that you're going to have to deal with. So ultimately, because of the lower durability and because of the charged R2, I'm going to be placing the Death Talons in the A tier. Now, the next weapon is going to be the Royal Horn Bow. It is technically considered a dagger as a weapon type, but of course it's actually a bow, our first ranged weapon in Lies of P, which is something that we were totally lacking in the game, as the only real way to deal damage at a big distance was to either use consumables or rely on your Legion Arm. So having a primary weapon that you can utilize to do exactly that is actually going to serve a big purpose and fill in that niche. So actually, how good is the Royal Horn Bow? While it is a weapon mostly focused on technique, having a D scaling in motivity and B in technique, meaning you can raise it up to A with a pretty low physical attack, because that is the biggest trade-off for this weapon. You have all of this extra range to where you're able to hit the enemies from, but because you have that much range, the damage that you deal with the bow is going to be much lower. That said, the damage output that you can output output with this weapon is actually quite decent. You have essentially two different firing modes with the bow that you need to get used to, both of them being accessed by pressing the R1 or left click. So if you simply tap the R1 button and keep tapping it very slowly, you're going to be getting these slow firing shots, one at a time, that don't consume a lot of stamina but allow you to play much safer. However, if you spam the same button, you're going to get this volley of 4 different shots that come out in quick succession, and your character becomes unable to move in that moment, so it is a very unsafe move for you to perform. But if you want to get some big damage in, that is the way to do so. However, it burns through your stamina incredibly quickly, as that is another disadvantage of the bow, so you do need to be very careful about how you use it. The heavy attack also has a couple of interesting things. If you simply tap it, you get a couple of shots that fire kind of like in a shotgun spread, so it can allow you to deal with crowd control and hit multiple enemies. But if you hold down the button and charge your heavy attack, if you release it at the right moment, you're going to get this much more powerful arrow that is going to knock you back and deal a lot more damage. The timing is very precise, it's not very forgiving, so you do need to practice it a little bit, but you are rewarded with a lot of damage each time you do it. And as for the Fable Arts, it has a couple of very interesting ones. The first one being Dodge Shot, which is this dash that you do in the air that you can aim to where you want to go. You can do it backwards, you can do it forwards, and allows you to keep the enemy at bay. This does not protect you from the red attacks the enemies do, but it allows you to put up a lot of distance, and of course, because you don't waste any stamina whenever you perform this, you can use it whenever you run out of stamina to quickly get out of danger very easily. Now this move right here consumes 2 bars, but if you hold it down, it's going to fire a more powerful shot and is going to consume 3 bars instead of 2. As for the second Fable art, we have Patient Shot, which is this charged shot that you can charge all the way down and allows you to fire off this big arrow that is going to deal a massive amount of damage. The bow also has some of the best dodge attacks that allow you to put some distance between yourself and the enemies, like this. It always has this step back whenever you do the dodge attack, and the running attack moves you closer to the enemy. So ultimately just a very good moveset that pretty much complements exactly whatever it is you want to do with this weapon. Well, I shouldn't exactly say massive, it is massive for the bow, but compared to a lot of other weapons, it's going to do slightly more than some of the more powerful Fable Arts in the game. And given the downtime that you have to charge up this arrow, and the fact that the hitbox of the arrow isn't even that big, or that the range of the arrow is surprisingly short at times, it feels like you should be able to hit the boss across the entire arena, but in fact a lot of times the shot is simply not going to reach. It's something that only really comes into play at the start of a boss fight, in some of those fights where the boss is maybe talking, they're standing still at the beginning, and you start with 3 Fable charges. You can do it right away. And also a cool thing about this shot is that it's also very good at applying elemental grinders, so if you have the fire grinder for example, you're very likely going to pretty much guarantee that you're going to burn the target whenever you use this, but again you're going to have very little moments where you're actually going to use it. Now another downside of the bow is, much like the claws, the weapon's durability, as you really do burn through the Royal Horn's bow durability insanely quickly, especially if you're firing those quick shots in succession, as I do believe that this is the developer's way to combat people just staying at the edge of the map, firing off those arrows against the bosses. But given that a lot of times you're going to be at a distance between yourself and the boss, or a lot of your enemies, I don't find this to be as big of a problem with the bow as it is with the claws, because you're going to be safe more often than not. Now another huge thing in favor of the bow is just how light the weapon is, only weighing 7 weight units, when a lot of other weapons weigh around 15 or perhaps even more. This means that effectively you can have the Royal Horn bow as a secondary weapon that you pull out whenever you are exploring the map and you want to pull an enemy towards you, you want to finish them off, because in Lies of P, I find that you are ganked by enemies, or you have enemies around the corner, or places where there are enemies in the ceiling and whatnot. You have a lot of these ambushes, a lot more than you find in games like Elden Ring and Dark Souls 3 for example, in my opinion. So having a weapon like the bow that you can pull out in those instances and quickly dispatch those enemies, or at the very least pull them toward you, and by the time they reach you they're going to be low HP, makes exploration a lot easier and frankly less frustrating. And even when fighting bosses, the bow is a pretty competent weapon. You can have it as a backup for your secondary weapon, so that whenever the enemy gets out of range and you need to do a charged attack to stagger the enemy, you can quickly swap to the bow and perform the charged attack that has a lot of range, so you don't run into those scenarios where you need to quickly get into the enemy to stagger them, but you get hit in the process. But even if you want to use the Royal Horn bow as a main weapon for these boss fights, it is still going to work work quite well because you still retain all of the kit you have in Lies of P. You can still use the Legion arm to deal damage, and again with the example I gave with the claws, you have a lot of synergy with the new Legion arm Icarus and the Arm of God amulet to deal a lot more damage. You can still block, you can still parry, and I find that this weapon allows for a very forgiving time against some of these bosses, because if an enemy attacks you and you block the hit, even if the enemy moves away from you, you simply tap R1 a couple of times and you're going to regain all of that health. So while these boss fights are going to take a little bit longer when you are using the bow, in a lot of cases they become a lot easier. Especially in the base game, I've been running the gauntlet and doing all of the previous bosses using only the bow, and a lot of them just get crippled by the ranged attacks this weapon has. So for all of these reasons, I'm going to be ranking the Royal Horn bow in the S tier, the first one on the list. The next weapon on the list is going to be my personal favorite, the Pale Knight, which despite being classified as a greatsword, it's pretty much just a gunblade. This weapon feels absolutely fantastic to use, has a fantastic moveset, a lot of damage, and the most satisfying sound effects in the entire game. Just listen to this. So this is pretty much a quality weapon with a B scaling in motivity and C in technique, which is the best kind of scaling that you can get in this game, since in Lies of P, every stat has a very low soft cap, meaning that you would be better off putting around 30 to 40 points into both motivity and technique than a lot of times putting, let's say, 70 or 80 points into one of the stats, as you are going to be getting a lot more damage by splitting between the two. So whenever you get a weapon like this, with a decent scaling in both stats, you're going to get a lot more damage out of it compared to other weapons, especially at higher levels, which you are going to be at a higher level by simply being in the DLC. That said, the thing that truly makes this gunblade shine is the weapon's moveset. Your basic R1 attacks are these horizontal swipes that you can do pretty quickly. They're not very fast because you are technically wielding a greatsword, so you do end up with those slower animations, but those R1s are pretty good at hitting the enemies. But in between those light attacks, you're always able to slip in one of your heavy attacks that are going to fire off a shot and deal a lot of damage and push you backwards. And effectively, you're going to use that to dodge incoming attacks, either naturally or because you see that the enemy is about to perform an attack. So some of the combos you can do very quickly is R1 into R2, which is a very fast combo and allows you to quickly get out of danger. And then of course, if you do R2 right after, you dash in and do damage that way and resume the combo. And of course, you can also hold the R2 button. I don't like doing the charged R2 on the first hit like this. I much prefer do something like this and then charge the second hit going in to deal more damage. But if you do light into charged heavy, you can see that that charged heavy comes out very quickly and again puts a lot of distance between you and the enemy. So it pretty much guarantees that you're going to dodge an incoming attack like this. And of course you can then follow with a charged heavy and resume the combo. Again, I don't really use R1 into charged R2 that much, but it is a nice option that you have that is going to deal a decent amount of damage. And the dash attacks of this weapon are also quite powerful, with it being a thrust for the light attack and a thrust into a shotgun shell for the heavy attack. And much like with the running attack, you have this very good lunge like that, and with the heavy attack you run in, fire the explosion and back off. It's a really satisfying movement that allows you to have a ton of control over the course of the fight, getting up close and getting away, always dealing damage and having a lot of uptime on the monster. Another really cool thing about the gunblade is that whenever you do your visceral attack, your critical attack, you fire off that explosion as well. So these visceral attacks are going to end up doing a lot of damage. Now as for your Fable Arts, Strengthened Bullet is a temporary buff that you activate that costs 2 Fable Art gauges and is going to temporarily increase the damage of your explosion attacks, aka whenever you do your heavy attack or your critical attacks, by about 50%, which is a huge damage boost, and therefore you should always have it active as much as possible. The activation time for this buff is actually pretty quickly, and because you don't consume any stamina, in fact you start to regain stamina whenever you perform it, it's often something that I will be activating after I finish my combos just to be more more effective. As for the second Fable art, Full Salvo, you very simply go into this Final Fantasy Machinist stance where you aim the weapon at the enemy and you fire off this very powerful explosion shot at the cost of 3 Fable art gauges that is going to deal a lot of damage and can of course be boosted by your other Fable art. So of course if you have full Fable art gauge, you can effectively activate Strengthened Bullet to get the buff and go immediately into Full Salvo to deal a ton of damage. One thing to note about Full Salvo is that whenever you activate it, you do get a decent amount of hyper armor whenever you use it, but you still take full damage from any attack you receive, so you do need to be careful about that. It also doesn't have a ton of range, so you might need to get close to make sure that it actually lands on the enemy. Overall, I find that the Pale Knight is an absolutely fantastic weapon that really doesn't have any practical downsides. You have quite a lot of reach and effectively some additional range whenever you fire off your shots, because you don't need to be necessarily at melee range for them to connect. You have a little bit of extra distance. On top of that, you can always utilize Full Salvo as a way to pretty much guarantee that you break the enemy stance, doing a lot of damage from a safe distance that can be further boosted by Strengthened Bullet. And I gotta say it one more time, this is the most satisfying weapon in the game for me. The only way that this weapon would be better is if it had a B scaling in technique, which having a B scaling in motivity and technique is extremely rare in this game, but as it is, I am very confident in saying that this is one of the best weapons in the entire game, and therefore the Pale Knight, the Gunblade, is going to be placed in the S tier. And the final weapon of the video, I am truly sad that there are only 4 DLC weapons in the game, is the Monad's Rose Sword. And this weapon might as well be called Yamato because you become Virgil whenever you use it. It is hands down one of the most insane weapons, if not the most insane weapon in the entire game, so let's get into it. For starters, it has both a B scaling in motivity in technique, which as I explained before is extremely good and is going to allow you to get a lot more damage out of this weapon. It is kind of sad that there are no advanced special weapons in the DLC. I kind of figured that they would be adding that, but that being said, this weapon is going to perform the best with a quality build, but can still work quite well if you modify it into motivity or technique. Now for starters, the Rose Sword has one of the best movesets, if not the best moveset in the entire game. Your basic R1 attacks launch you forward pretty far, which is extremely rare in this game, and as you can see, you're able to close the gap pretty easily by just spamming the button. Now your basic heavy attack is pretty decent but nothing special, but your charged heavy is truly special. It's a huge gap closer that hits twice as you spin around like this, and again covers a ton of distance. Now your dashing R1 is also extremely good because you can see the amount of range that you get with this launch is pretty insane. And you really don't get these types of lunges in Lies of P. And your dashing heavy, well, that is also pretty insane. You don't get quite as much of a lunge, but you get that spinning attack that hits twice like that. As for your running attacks, they are both also quite good, covering quite a lot of distance, and a follow-up to the charged heavy is pretty cool, having this spin that deals a lot of damage. But truly what I find to be the best way to play with the Rose Sword is to simply chain together the light attack into the heavy attack and keep doing that over and over again. So you do light attack, heavy attack, light attack, heavy attack, and you're going to deal a lot of damage that way. You're going to be getting close to the monster if it's getting away from you, and if you want to dodge out of an attack, you can do it like that. Go in with the R2, go in with the R1, depending on how far it actually is. You always have a lot of options with this weapon, and getting close to the enemy is never a problem. And as for your critical attack, it's also pretty cool. You get this really cool effect that deals a lot of damage, and again, you can see why I'm calling you Virgil when you use this weapon. And as for the Fable arts, they are quite flashy, but one of them truly stands above the rest and might just be the best Fable art in the entire game, because honestly I find hard to beat that. So the first one is Blossoming, which is a one-cost Fable art that is this big dash that deals a decent amount of damage, and you can chain it together like this, and has that after image that deals some extra damage at the end. It's pretty cool, and you can use it to deal damage and get out of danger, chain it to different enemies, but it's not something that I would primarily use. Now the second Fable art by the name of the Rose is where things really become crazy, and yeah, this is just Yamato. Yep, that is the Virgil meme right there. This weapon might as well be called Yamato. It has an insanely area of effect, and while you are performing this, when your character disappears, you become untargetable. Whatever the boss is doing, it's not going to touch you, it's not going to damage you, and on top of that you do get some hyper armor at the beginning of the animation, but you still take full damage whenever you activate it. But you can effectively use it as a way to dodge some of the big AoE attacks that a lot of bosses do that are going to one-shot you while still being able to dish out a ton of damage in the process. The area it covers is also pretty insane, so if there are any nearby enemies, they are definitely going to be getting hit as well. And honestly, it's very hard to find anything bad to say about this weapon. I guess the only downside I can truly find about it is that it has a lower weapon durability, because again, you're going to be hitting the enemy so many times. But for the amount of damage that you deal with it and the ease of use that the weapon has, it truly is one of the best weapons in the game and is very much warranted placing it at the top of the S tier. Now, I am going to be ranking all of the other weapons from DLC, the ones that you can assemble, in a different video, as I will also be ranking all of the other weapons from the base game as well. I had planned on doing that before the DLC came out, but as you all know, the developers shadow dropped the DLC without properly announcing a release date, so I did not have the time to do it beforehand. But hopefully I'll be able to then compile everything together in a big video for you guys, so you can see my actual ratings for all of the weapons in the game. I'm still going through my second playthrough of the DLC, absolutely loving every detail that they added to the game, so if you look forward to more Lies of P videos, then please subscribe to the channel. That being said, my name is Dark Hero, thank you all so much for watching, and as always, happy hunting!